Good afternoon, and I would just like to thank everyone for being here for our Employer Spotlight event with APSIA, which stands for the Association of Professional Schools of International Affairs. I'm delighted to have our speaker for the day, Carmen Yetzi Mazzara. She has been the Executive Director for APSIA since January of 2014. Before we begin, I just want everyone to be aware that this presentation will be recorded. Also, just some tips. Make sure that if you do have any questions for this session, make sure you hold them until the end. And also, you can just enter your questions in the chat box during Carmen's entire presentation. And so at this time, I just would like to pass this over to Carmen.
Thank you, Ms. Adams, and I want to say thank you to Ms. Price, Ms. Wigglesworth, and the whole team at Bowie State for inviting me to be here. I'm so glad to talk to you all today. I have a very quick presentation that I wanted to share with you, but in the end, as Ms. Adams said, my hope is that we can just answer your questions and share with you a little bit more about what the many different possibilities for careers in international affairs look like. So let's see if we're going to get cooperation. We did. Fantastic. So where to start? The field of international affairs is actually an enormous one. So many issues are impacted by global affairs and global issues that we talk about it as really an interdisciplinary field. So while you may be studying in the economics program or history or language or computer science or any of the engineering, any of those other disciplines, international affairs brings together and weaves all of those different things together. So what sorts of things are possible? Certainly careers in communications and public relations, business, well-known fields like development or diplomacy or defense. You'll see a lot of opportunities in security and intelligence, science and technology, working on questions about human rights, education. Certainly these days, matters of energy and the environment are really foremost in people's minds. So for good or for ill, within the field of international affairs, there's a ton of opportunity. And we'll talk a little bit more about different ways to put interests together. But as you look at all of these possibilities, know that there is an international element to it all. And there's also a way to really weave together different interests. So how might you know whether the field of international affairs makes sense for you? Well, it might be because you like really big, complex problems like questions about poverty, the matters of the environment, disease, which is obviously such a topical issue these days. Maybe you feel that broader call to service. You want to contribute to helping other people solve their own problems or advance their own lives. You may be really curious about the world and want to travel or be really interested in different languages, different cultures, different sports, different books. The world is big and it's weird and it's wonderful. And so you may just be curious about how all those different people and places came to be like they are. Particularly being close to DC, but of course overall, maybe you're interested in matters of politics and government. All of those policy choices affect our everyday lives, and they bring us together, they bring us apart. So maybe those are really the questions that drive you and why you might be interested in international affairs and policy. For me, I just like arguing. That's not my only interest in international affairs, of course, but I never met an argument I didn't like. And so if you like that exchange of ideas and going back and forth and challenging your assumptions or challenging someone else's, there's a place for you here in the field of international affairs. And there's also, of course, being that catalyst for some change bigger and broader than yourself. What we do in one place absolutely affects what happens somewhere else. So if you're interested in how all those things spill over or how your choices might affect someone else's life, there's a place for you here in the field of international affairs. So again, there's so many different possibilities and so many ways to bring together those motivations that drive you or those interests that make you curious about why things are the way they are. So what kinds of interests and majors, of course, can be brought together to have a career in international affairs? I'm not going to read this whole slide to you, but just a few different possibilities that people may not automatically assume are connected to the field of international affairs. So let's say you're studying business, but you're also curious about a part of the world. There's an entire field called political risk analysis, where you combine the interests of a business and the way they make decisions about what to do, where to go, where to manufacture their product, where to sell their product, and how the broader questions about the political situation, the history, the culture, the language, the economics, the stability within a place or a region is going to impact that business. And so you can bring those two interests together for this kind of career in political risk analysis. And you'll see those folks working in the private sector, you'll see them in insurance companies, you'll see them in the government, you'll see them in lots of different aspects of the public, private, and the nonprofit sectors as a way to bring those different interests in business and risk and history and culture and language and economics and politics all together. We've talked a little bit about the environment, and obviously people who are looking at issues of climate change. So again, you might be interested in a part of the world and the environment and environmental science or environmental issues and how that's going to play out and impact everyday lives, or what kinds of policy choices are needed to mitigate that impact on everyday lives. You might be interested in psychology or engineering or computer science. All of these different elements come together and can be combined to create really wonderful, viable careers in the field of international affairs. So the last one I just wanted to draw out is about that element of computer science and perhaps questions of sustainable development. There's a lot of capacity within things like mobile technology, mobile phones, mobile health, social media, to change the way people look at questions of global health and how they stay healthy or how they deal with, let's say, a global pandemic. And so if you can bring that expertise in information systems or IT or computer science together with information and training in international development, you again can have a really powerful combination to reach people through their phones, through their social media accounts, to impact the healthy choices that they make. So again, lots of possibilities, lots of ways to put things together to have a really wonderful and viable career. So what kinds of things and tools do you need to be successful? And I don't think any of these are necessarily distinctive to international affairs, but they definitely have a specific element to them. So of course, experience, the internships that you have, and we can talk about ways to get internships even in a weird time like this, the kind of experience that shows you how an office works, how a particular industry talks about itself, all of that insider knowledge that you can only gain from being exposed to it. Obviously in international affairs, international professional experience is a real advantage. And again, we can talk about how to access those things, whether it's local to your community or being able to go abroad, and lots of other ways, of course, to help make it affordable and accessible to all kinds of different students. I think that you need to be able to write well, even if you know a ton of things about a subject. If you can't convey that on paper, all that information in your head doesn't do me any good because I don't live in your head. And the same is true with being able to speak comfortably in front of lots of different kinds of audiences. No matter where you may be or what kind of field you might be in, you're going to need to present, again, all of that stuff that you know in a way that's clear and accessible and interesting to other people. So if right now you're worried that you don't write as well as you want, or you're not as comfortable in front of groups of people as you want, this is a great time while you're in college to start to practice those skills in a really safe space. So be the one who gives the group presentation, or the one who writes up the group notes, or the one who writes for a local student group, to start to really work on the mechanics of writing well and clearly and speaking comfortably in front of different groups of people. For careers in international affairs, obviously proficiency in a language other than your native language is a huge asset. And again, there's lots of ways to get that kind of training, everything from free apps on your phone all the way to going to live somewhere, working with local community groups, lots of ways to gain proficiency in a language other than, let's say, English, to make sure you also have that tool in your toolkit. The ability to understand what data tells you and the ability to analyze it and think complexly about it is very important, not just in international affairs, but in lots of different skill sets. So being able to read an argument that uses numbers and ask, well, why did these numbers come out this way? Being able to use numbers to prove the point you're trying to make or to disprove someone else's point can be a really important bit of professional skills to have. And again, if this is something that you don't really feel like you have right now or something you'd like to deepen, college is a great time to do it. There's also a lot of free software out there that'll let you practice on your own if you want, or if you want to volunteer with a particular organization that has numbers that need crunched. All of those different kinds of skills make you a really competitive candidate for lots of fields. I think in our space, in the space of international affairs, that technical knowledge is very important for some positions, but even for jobs that aren't regularly doing data crunching, the ability to understand the analyses that others have done is really important. And that's true whether, again, you're in the government, whether you're in the private sector, or whether you're working for different nonprofits. So that's really something that I certainly didn't have as an undergrad, but I would really commend to you all to think about how you can just practice those mechanics as you go along. Understanding project management sounds really scary, but what it really at its heart means is that you know how to take an idea in your head and move it from this just an idea into your head into a reality. So it could be something with a club that you're a part of, a faith community, again, a local nonprofit if you volunteer, could be your work study position. Can you take something from A to Z? Can you think of what you want, and then can you help achieve it? It could also be something like applying for a fellowship. Can you conceive of applying for a Pickering or a Wrangell or a Gilman or a Boren or any of these things, and I'm happy to translate all of those if you aren't familiar, and see it through? Can you balance all the steps, keep all the plates spinning? I think for many of you now, as you try to navigate going to school online and dealing with all of the transition and all of those different pieces, you're going to have a good story to tell about how you can keep a lot of things in the air. But that's different than perhaps being results oriented and saying, I thought of this thing and then I created it and then I watched it and I saw it through and I decided, or I could evaluate what worked and what didn't. Lastly, I would say you need a network of people around you. I've had a chance to talk a little bit with the career staff at Bowie State, and they're wonderful and amazing. So they're a key part of your network, but so are your professors, so are your classmates, so are alumni from Bowie State who graduated long before you. These are all part of the folks that you have as a support system as you try to gain access to opportunities, to gain insights into different organizations or careers or options. There's a lot of information you can glean from talking to the people around you. And again, it could be your peers, it could be your professors, it could be the staff. Don't also be afraid to talk to the alumni who've been a part of your institution, or perhaps a program that you've done, or another organization that you're a part of. All of these folks can bring you really important details as you try to discern what makes the most sense for you. So we've talked a little bit about how you can gain all of those different opportunities. So I mentioned internships, I mentioned work study. There's lots of positions that have moved online these days. There's lots of ways to see and gain that kind of experience in professional settings. Study abroad, if you can do it, I highly recommend it. And if you can't, I'm happy to talk about other ways to gain international exposure and experience, even without leaving campus or without leaving your town. We've talked about your coursework and different kinds of publications that you can put out. Coursework can also be a great way to gain those analytical skills. If you were going to write a paper on a subject, see what kind of quantitative analysis you can fit into it. So it's a way to practice and use what you have to do anyway to build out and gain some additional skills. In terms of things like project management, we've talked about Peace Corps, or we didn't, but we can talk about Peace Corps. AmeriCorps is also a great opportunity. There's volunteering ops, lots of different ways, like I said, to take something that lives as an idea and move it all the way through. And I mentioned professors and I mentioned alum, but there's also a lot of young professionals groups that might be focused on a particular issue area like security and intelligence. They might be focused on a broad topic like foreign policy. They might be regional based for your town or your community. So again, there's lots of ways to connect with your peers and folks who have similar interests to you. It can even be about a sports team or whatever. So it's a way to build out the network of people that you know and might be able to support you. So again, we've talked a lot about these different pieces. Many organizations are offering remote internships this fall, and a lot of them have not locked in their candidates yet. So you still have a lot of possibilities. Your town, your community might also be paired with an international city through something like the Sister Cities program. Might be through the mayor's office or the county. There's a lot of relationships that go back and forth. It could be through the Office of Trade Promotion, where they're trying to take local businesses and expand their market share outside of the United States. 95% of consumers live outside the US, and local businesses, local towns, local communities know that, and they need people who want to help bridge that gap to create more opportunities domestically. We've talked about the kind of things you can do in coursework, but there's also a lot of blogs that you can write for. You can start your own, you can practice those skills, you can work with a faculty member to do research. None of that, it has to involve human contact and interaction, so you can certainly do those things during the pandemic as a complement to your coursework or as part of your coursework to make sure that you can build up that professional experience. It does take time, but it can also be complementary to the other kinds of things that you're doing as you try to navigate this unusual semester that we're in. Certainly plans of freelance projects, if you have language skills, there's a lot of freelance work for translators and editors. Even if you don't, there's always a call for people who are native English speakers to try and check someone else's work. Contract work, things that people will pay you to do on a short-term basis to, again, take an idea that maybe they have and move it from point A to point Z. So lots of ways that you can gain experience right now, even in this unusual setting when traditional channels like internships might be a bit disrupted, to really gain access to the kinds of experience and exposure that will serve you well. We've talked about some of the human kinds of interaction, but there's also online meetups to talk about a particular issue that gets you excited, to practice your language skills, to rally people to a cause. Obviously, it's election season, so there's lots of different online opportunities to engage on a civic education basis. Discussion boards to just get your name out there and share your opportunities. So all of these things are things you can do right now, even in the middle of the pandemic, to build up your professional experience and gain exposure to lots of different things. Because you may not be sure which of those fields sounds interesting to you. So all of these things that you can see on this slide are also ways to test and see, oh, well, I really enjoyed that and I didn't really care for that at all. So you can get a sense of which kinds of things might really resonate with you the most. So once you're ready and you have a good sense of the kinds of opportunities you'd like to apply for, I want to walk through a little bit of advice that I found based on the last 20 plus years of reading applications. And I'm sure this is going to complement a lot of what you hear from the staff in the career office. So every application is going to be different. Follow directions, please. That's the way you stay in contention just at a bare minimum level. So they might ask for a cover letter, they might ask for a resume. Sometimes they'll ask for transcripts, that's very unusual. Sometimes they'll ask for writing samples, and they'll give you guidance on whether it should be on a particular topic or how long it should be. Sometimes they'll ask for references, or they'll just ask if you have them to make them available. And I'm happy to talk about what makes a quality reference, how to stay in touch with people who can be your references when we get to the Q&A. So cover letters are one of those tricky things that often trip people up, but if you think about them in a clear structure, I think it can ease some of the anxiety. So I recommend a structure that talks about you, that talks about me as the employer, and then what talks about what we can do together. So that opening part of your cover letter needs to hook me. It needs to convince me to keep reading, because I'm probably trying to get through these as fast as possible and figure out who I don't want to pay attention to. So bring me in from the very first paragraph, why I should keep reading about you. What can you do? How are you connected to that particular job? Then I would say the second and third paragraphs, they should really be about me. It's not that I don't care about you, it's that I don't care about you yet. I want to know what you as a candidate are going to do for me as an employer. So that's where in the second and third paragraphs, you can draw out some specific examples of things that you have done that are going to meet my needs or advance the work of my organization. So how would you know that? It's in the job description. If you can take that second and third paragraph and cite me examples of how you've done what I've asked for, it's going to be really easy for me to understand how you are going to help me meet my goals. And then you close out by talking about what we can do together. So how is your experience or your concern for this issue going to help me do something together that we can only do together that I would not be able to do as an employer without you? And that kind of structure, you are amazing, I am amazing, and you're going to help me be more amazing. So let us be amazing together, is really a convincing cover letter that will help me as an employer understand why I should want to talk to you more about bringing you in to my organization. So again, you, me, and us, or we. On your resume, 9 times out of 10, particularly if you're an undergrad, 1 page. And there's a lot of disagreement about these things, but I would argue a 1-page max, because otherwise, unless you have really, really rocked the heck out of your last 20 whatever years on the planet, there's a lot of detail in there that's going to distract me from finding the things that I need to know. It should go without saying, but you would be amazed how many of your colleagues cannot handle a resume that is free of mistakes in spelling or grammar. So be sure that you read it and reread it and show it to someone else and bring it to the Career Center to make sure it's typo free. Because if you can't handle getting your own resume correct, why should I trust you with my own work product where I really need it to be right? I would also encourage you to do it in something that tells me a story, but in reverse chronological order. So start with the most recent thing and then work your way backwards. And I'm happy to talk with you all as well about ways to use experiences that may not seem like they fit and translate them into ways that really connect with a particular employer. So maybe you worked in retail, or maybe you worked in food service as a barista. All of those kinds of things have really useful job skills that we can translate into things that connect with the kinds of positions that you'll see in international affairs, or even more broadly than that. I would argue that your resume needs to be short and tight, clear and concise. So a bulleted list of relevant experiences and your education. So you list the job and then tell me with detail who, what, when, where, how for each of those points. If you list a particular job or experience and you can really only think of 1 bullet, it's probably the kind of thing that might be worth leaving out. So again, I'm happy to strategize with you all, and I'm sure the career office is too, about ways to unpack those different things to make sure that it makes sense to have a particular experience on your resume. But again, it should be short and tight. If you want to write long, grand sentences, put that in your cover letter. And the cover letter and the resume live together that way to tell this whole story about you. But on the resume, short, tight bullets with clear details. It should tell me what you've accomplished. Just saying, I made 5 widgets doesn't necessarily help me unless you're applying for a widget maker position where they only need you to make 4 widgets. Tell me what was the result of what you did. You know, taught 5 kids to read, helped them stay on grade level. Maybe, so if you were a community volunteer and you were teaching those 5 kids, what was the result? You helped them stay on grade level, or you helped them advance. It shows me that there was some output, some accomplishment that you had from that particular experience. It wasn't just a thing you did, it was something that yielded something else. I said this already, but I cannot say it enough. Give me details, give me parameters. It helps me measure what you have done against what I need. So if you made 5 widgets and I need you to make 50 widgets, I get a sense that, oh, maybe there's a bit of a widget gap there. But if you made 5 widgets and I only need you to make 3, I know that you can really handle what I'm throwing at you. So share details. Tell me who the audience was. Who were you being of service to? What were you doing? All of that is going to help build out a clear resume that lets me measure you against what I need in this position. And it's perfectly acceptable to have different iterations of your resume where you pull out the details that connect most clearly with a job description. I have one giant document that's multiple pages long, and then as I put together a job, I might pull out this position or that position, and there's a very powerful word that you can put under or after experience that just says selected. So it'll say education or experience selected, and that lets me as an employer know that there's way more to you than I'm seeing on this piece of paper, so I should want to talk to you to learn about all those other things that didn't make it into that one page. Because at the end of the day, the point of the resume and the cover letter is to get you the interview in most cases. So they really should want they should want to entice me to want to talk to you more and learn more about you and how you can help me out. Obviously, once you get that interview, you want to be prepared. You want to learn about the company. Don't just read the job description, read the About Us section on their website. See if they have a posting in the university's handshake system or whatever the computer system is, to find out a little bit more about them so that you really come prepared to talk about how you can be of service to their mission. Do understand what the job position is. If you can find out who the interviewer is, look them up on LinkedIn, talk to the career office, see if they've encountered that person before. So get to know them, not in a crazy stalkery way, but just in a really polite way. So again, you can see if there's any points of connection between the two of them. If you can practice, do it. There's a million lists online, and I'm sure in the career office too, of commonly asked interview questions. Think about them in advance. There's a good chance they're going to ask you why you want this job. That's a pretty easy one to answer or think about. So do that in advance. Think through some of those common questions so you're ready and prepared and polished when the time comes for you to answer. And after the interview, be sure you say thank you. Be sure you stay in contact. Again, not in a stalkery way, but in a really polite way that shows and continues to show that you're interested in supporting their work. In addition to all of those very everyday things for the interview, be sure that your LinkedIn profile, which is often a recruiter or an organization's first stop before they interview you, is up to date, is in shape, again, shows results, shows details, clearly has a lovely picture that lets me see your face, that has a little bit of information about you, lists your education. Make sure it's as professional and polished as your resume and your cover letter, because that's, as I said, an important first stop for a lot of organizations. And then use that network that we talked about. Ask your classmates, has anybody interned at this organization? Ask your professors, look to the alumni office. It's unlikely that you are the first person who's ever interviewed there. So see what other information or inside networks or inside intelligence you can get so you really come prepared and ready to shine at that particular interview. Few other do's and don'ts. We talked about letters of recommendation, but please ask for recommendations from people who actually know who you are and know you well. The most important title in the world or the most famous person in the world who writes you a letter that just says, oh, Janae is nice, does me absolutely no good. I would rather a letter of recommendation that tells me about who you are, give your recommenders instructions so that they know the kinds of traits to draw out in your letter, so that again, as a reader, as the employer, I'm getting the information that I need to want to talk to you. It's perfectly acceptable to ask for a standing letter of recommendation. So if you have a professor now that you've maybe worked closely with or that you have a good relationship with, you can ask them for a generic letter that just unpacks your broad qualities. But then you can go back to them and say, you wrote me this general letter, would you please tailor it a little bit because I'm applying for this job? And that'll help them do less work because they've already written the bulk of it, but maybe sharpen some of the points so that they can really make sure that you shine in the mind of the reader. Don't ask your family, don't ask your friends. I shouldn't have to say that, but I've read too many letters of recommendation from somebody's grandma telling me how great they are. And I'm sure they are, but it's your grandmother. Of course she's gonna tell me that you're great. So that really doesn't help. Same thing for famous people who can only say very bland, generic things about you. Make sure that the information you give your recommender is correct. I also have seen a lot of letters of recommendation that, let's say, go to Georgetown, and the letter is all about how badly the student wants to go to George Washington University. And so as a reader, I go, well, that's great. That person should probably apply to George Washington then and leave me at Georgetown alone. So make sure your recommenders have clear information, know to whom things should go, and that will help you avoid some of those foolish mistakes. You also, if it's not a formal letter, you're just listing their contact information, make sure your references know that they might get a call. I'll occasionally get a ring from an office that asks me about a student, and if it's someone I haven't thought about or talked to in a long time, I can't leave the best impression with the employer because I'm completely caught off guard, completely caught flat-footed. So if you're gonna list someone as your reference, and then you're gonna give their name to someone else, make sure they know about it, make sure they know who the organization is, and if you can, what the job is and what kinds of things they're gonna be asked to speak on, because you will be better served when they are prepared to talk about you. So again, just some high-level do's and don'ts, and I'm happy to talk more in Q&A about these kinds of things. So just to wrap up, I hope that the field of international affairs in all of its many facets is something that might be appealing to you or of interest to you. And if you would like to learn more, you can see all of the links of different resources that we have on our site, lots of events, information on fellowships and scholarships and ways to pay for that experience that I talked about. If you think that graduate school is going to be a critical step in your professional progression, we list and unpack all of our different member graduate schools. And then I went at a very high level through the different career options, but we have a whole guide to international affairs careers on our website where we go into a little bit more depth, offer some tips, suggest some different organizations. So it's a really good place to begin to explore different possibilities. And then we're active across many different social media channels, telling stories about alum, posting jobs and fellowships and internships and all sorts of different opportunities. We have an active job board on our website as well, where you can find internships both in person and remote. So many, many different tools to help you expand in your understanding of what international careers look like, and then perhaps find some specific opportunities. One specific opportunity that I want to invite you all to, a week from today, next Wednesday, September 30th, we're having an online graduate school fair. So 25 plus schools from all over the world there to talk to you and answer your personal questions. This is an event we do regularly throughout the year. So I hope you'll join us next Wednesday, and if not next Wednesday, at other events, and you can find them all at the website on your screen, apsia.org/events. So with that, and also you can see my contact information. If we don't get a chance to connect in this conversation, happy to connect other times. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open the floor up and see what questions I can answer for you all. Ms. Adams, do you prefer to moderate, or do you want to just have students raise hands? How do you prefer to do it?
I'm sure I can moderate. And also, I'm just going to remind all the students, please make sure you're entering your questions in the chat box, okay? So Carmen, I have our first question for you. What tips can you share with me to show my retail experience in a national security type position?
Sure. So the first thing that comes to mind is just basic customer service. The national security agencies have clients, and those clients are the federal government. So showing how you've been responsive, perhaps showing how you've balanced competing interests. If you had 3 customers in line and the phone ringing and someone else trying to get your attention, how did you deal with all of those different pressures at the same time? How did you keep track of details? It might have been inventory, it might have been money. All of those things are things that national security analysts, for example, do on a regular basis. They have to juggle competing interests as 14 different agencies call and all want kind of the same thing, but tailored to their needs. They might have to keep track of details about different people and places all at the same time. They definitely have to keep track of budgets. But again, at the end of the day, it really is about serving a customer and putting out a product that makes sense for the US federal apparatus. The same is true on the private sector security side, which is the side that many people don't think about. But those are just a few things that come to mind from retail experience that might really be beneficial to draw out. Managing people, managing details, balancing busyness can be a good way to just showcase what you've done in a retail environment. Happy to go in more into depth if you like.
Okay, Carmen, so we have a question from Derek Blackwell, and he would like to know, could you go more in depth about what the numbers aspect on the resume, what specifically? Those are 2 questions.
Sure. So Derek, it would depend on a particular job or position, but to refer back to the previous question about retail, the kinds of numbers you might be able to draw out could be customers served maybe, or amounts of money handled, if you manage staff, how many people. So as you think about the numbers that you can put in on a bullet point of your resume, again, who, how many people did you serve? How many people worked for you or worked with you? What did you do? How many widgets did you make? How many shirts did you fold? How many copies did you sell? How much? So again, if you were handling money, you know, cleared out the drawer every night in excess of $12,000, just to pull a number out of the air. So as you think about the numbers, think about who, think about what, think about how much, think about how often. If you taught 1 kid for 1 day, maybe that's not a particularly compelling resume bullet point. But if you taught 15 kids 5 days a week in 1st grade, those are all clear numbers that you can work into a bullet point. So without knowing more about you, Derek, it's hard to give you particular examples, but those are just some ways to kind of think about your own internal numbers. Are grad programs for APSIA only for undergraduate students? Nope. We have lots of mid-career programs, PhD programs, programs for students who've had lots of work experience, a little bit of work experience, veterans. We got a little bit of everybody in there. And they're not only for US students. So the joy and the sorrow is it's such a big, broad network that everybody, it's a big tent for everybody, for sure.
I got you. Just a follow-up question to that, and I thank you for coming here, by the way, and hosting this. My next question was basically, is you could take like a year off from school and then apply for those programs? Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think you're stronger if you do, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So we have another question. What other languages would you recommend I learn?
My glib answer is to say all of them, but no, that's obviously not really possible. It would kind of depend on your interests. If you're really interested in security, then any of the critical languages for national security, it could be Russian, it could be Arabic, it could be Chinese, it could be Urdu. If you're interested in development, it might be French, it might be Swahili, it might be Spanish. There's 5 languages that are designated by the United Nations just because of the sheer number of people who speak them. So that's English, Spanish, French, Russian, and Chinese. So just based on, of the 7 billion people on the planet playing the odds, one of those 5 is a good one, but it's also going to be really driven by your interests. If you're interested in business, German and Japanese are probably more useful to you than, and I'm making this up, but Pashto, right? But if you're interested in security, Pashto might be way more important or more useful to you and applicable than German. So it's in some ways driven by the sectors that are of interest to you, but on a broad level, the big 5 are the lowest hanging fruit in terms of communicating with other parts of humanity. And then we can get into like what other people will pay for, but that's a different question.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So the next question from a student is, are all these opportunities readily available to international students? She states, I'm asking this because I come from the UK and pursuing an HRD master's program and have applied for a few internships without success. I have a great resume, experience, and a lot to offer.
So anything that's connected to the US government or that's trying to market a particular bit of expertise to the US government, like say a consulting firm, where what a consulting firm sells is basically the knowledge of a human to the government. Anything like that is probably going to be closed to an international student because of the clearance process. The only part of the government that's probably open to international students is Capitol Hill. And if that's of interest to you, every Monday, the House of Representatives drops an email with all the jobs and all the internships on Capitol Hill. Every Monday without fail. And you can sign up for it. It's free. It just comes right to your inbox. The Senate has a similar thing. I just don't get them straight into my inbox. But anything in the nonprofit sector and some things in the government sector on the internship side should be open to international students. The key there again might be, and obviously, Darlene, I don't know you at all, but it could be, are you as clearly connecting the great resume and experiences and what you'd like to offer to what the applicant needs or what the employer needs and making it easy for them to see you. If you're applying for paid internships or paid jobs, it might be a little trickier simply because they keep changing the rules on what's possible for international students and how you can get paid by employers. But if you have a lot of experience, it might just be a disconnect between what you can offer and what they need. And there may be, and I know it's English to English, but there may be a little bit of translation that might be involved between what you've done in the UK, for example, and then what you'd like to do here in the US. And I know that without having met you or knowing anything about you, but those are some common stumbling blocks to having international students pick up internships.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. So when is the best time a student should start applying for an international affairs internship?
when you see it open. Unlike other fields that maybe have a really strict recruiting schedule, with the exception of the federal government, most internships at companies and nonprofits come up when they're open. A lot of it resembles the semester schedule. So applying for an internship in the fall might have a June or July deadline. So sometime in the summer for a fall internship, sometime in the fall for a spring internship, but they'll be based a lot around the semester academic calendar. Federal internships are going to have a much longer lead time, sometimes 12 to 18 months because of the security clearance process. But again, all of that will be very visible in the job description. So if you see an internship that you like, apply. And even if you don't get it, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to say in your cover letter, if not this fall, then maybe next spring or next summer. So it's perfectly reasonable to signal that you're interested in longer term positions than just that one internship.
Okay, thank you. What do you consider a quality reference?
Someone who can actually tell me examples, real examples of what you have done and what you're like to spend time with. Because I spend more time, well, in the before the pandemic, I spent more time with my work colleagues than I did with my family. So I have to want to be around you for 8-9 hours a day. So someone who can complement the really practical stuff. Oh, you know, Erin really did this detailed work and she helped me with this and da-da-da, and she was not a miserable human being to be around. That is a powerful combination in a reference for me. Sorry, Erin, I don't know you either, but you were the first name I saw.
So at this time, if any students have any more questions, you can ask your questions now or enter them into the chat box. So just make sure you're doing that. And so I have another question. What you mentioned in your presentation about a wrangler, what is a wrangler?
I think what I said, I mentioned the Wrangle Fellowship. Was that it? Sure, we'll go with that. I mean, as a wrangler, I often talk about, so it's perfectly reasonable that I said a wrangler, which is someone who knows how to motivate other people to do a particular thing, or a cat herder or a grasshopper herder. But what I could have talked about was the Wrangle Fellowship, which is named after Congressman Charlie Wrangle. It's part of a trio of programs that the US State Department has that combine funding for graduate school with opportunities and careers in either the US Foreign Service through the State Department or the US Foreign Service through the US Department of Agency for International Development. So these are programs that are unfortunately only available to US citizens and maybe permanent residents, but it's a wonderful program that, like I said, has funding for graduate school. They also offer internships. The Wrangle program has an internship on Capitol Hill and with a US Embassy. There's another program that's a cousin to it called the Thomas Pickering Fellowship that has 2 internships at a US Embassy. And then there's a third fellowship that's, again, part of this trio called the Donald Payne Fellowship that complements internships with missions that belong to the US Agency for International Development with graduate school funding. And in those cases, for all 3 of those programs, they are particularly interested in investing in supporting students who are traditionally underrepresented at the State Department and USAID. And there are wonderful opportunities, and I've been involved with all 3 programs, and the folks that they have are really amazing, like I'm sure all of you are, and really feel that deep call to foreign service and trying to bring their expertise in and their life experiences, whatever that looks like, into those agencies.
Okay, Carmen, I have a question for you. How did you become involved in international careers?
Oh gosh. One of my early slides, I talked about all the different kinds of things you might be interested in. And I was one of those people that was always, from a young age, just curious about the world and wanted to know why things were the way they were. My hometown is a very small place where nobody ever really leaves. And so they thought I was quite odd to be curious about the rest of the world. I was also one of those people who was just interested in politics and arguing and kind of that whole list, and using whatever opportunities I have to try to make things better as much as I can. And so I found the field of international affairs in high school because an older cousin said, hey, have you heard about this thing? It kind of brings together all those interests that I know you have. And I just fell in love with it because it's culture and politics and language and history and going outside of your comfort zone and your bubble and the world that you know. And so it was just a really nice mix of things that brought together all of my interests. But I have friends who came to it because they really got interested in soccer or loved baseball and went from learning about the San Francisco Giants to wanting to learn about the Tokyo Giants, and so got interested in Japan. So a lot of people come to it from really different angles.
Okay, thank you, Carmen. There's another question for you. It says, I'm a freshman student and I have an interest in international careers. What are some suggestions you have to get my foot into the door of an international organization?
So internships are probably the easiest way. And being this close to DC, a lot of the UN international organizations have a presence in DC, and so welcome interns from all of the different schools, and a lot of them have gone remote right now. So in the old days, you could truly just open the phone book and go to the U section. It would be United Nations Development Program, United Nations, UNICEF, run the list. Google exists now, so you probably don't have to do that. But there is a great website that I will put in the chat. That's the UN Information Center. A lot of UN agencies are truly all in one building in downtown DC. But so intern there, get to understand how they work, how they talk about themselves, the language that they use. Model UN is also a great way. Again, it just teaches you the mechanics and how things work and all the different committees. Language experience is also critical. So especially if you're a freshman starting to gain that experience, and again, it could be a free app, it could be coursework, it could be just making friends with folks and learning from them. If you can do it, absolutely study abroad. International agencies, by definition, have an international workforce, and they look for folks who are competent and comfortable in an intercultural setting. So you need to be ready to have coworkers or bosses or subordinates who come from different cultures and who have really different expectations about how bosses and staff and subordinates work together. And that can come from being abroad and getting exposed to those different things. So there's lots of ways, even this early, to start to build towards some of those skill sets. An important note is that it does happen, but it's unusual for someone right out of college or even right out of grad school to get hired into the international organization system. So it's a long-term game plan. I apologize, they're doing work outside my condo. But it can happen, particularly if you are on the ground. So getting exposure, going to places maybe where there might be a relief situation or an environmental situation, and starting to get to know those people. A lot of it is by who you know and who knows you. So not being afraid to just go, or through a coursework or through a school program, to be present on the ground is a good way to get noticed, even at that kind of BA or even MA level.
Okay, we have another question from a student, and it states, what are some of the challenges you have had in your career and how were you able to overcome them?
Oh gosh, you might have actually stumped me for once. I think I've worked for really small organizations for probably the last 15 years. And so it's been a case where I have either been the only staff member or one of two or three. And so it's been the challenge where you need to be your own engine. And you'll see this in a lot of agencies or a lot of organizations. If something's going to get done, you have to keep enough gas in the motor to get it done. Mm-hmm. And that, particularly with a small organization, can be a challenge because there's no one else to pass it off to. There's no one else to refill the well. You have to look inside yourself and move it forward. And you'll see that I've worked in higher ed. A lot of times that's the case too. There really is no one else. But at the same time, you have to play with others and play within the ecosystem that you exist in. So that balance of charging forward and bringing everybody with you, there's my wrangling example, is that delicate dance. And it can kind of only come from experience, but it really has to come from inside and being willing to always keep trying to do your best or to leave something better than you found it.
Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. So if any students have any questions, please be sure to ask them or enter your question in the chat box. And I have one other question, and this is about graduate school. Do you know in this COVID environment, are graduate schools waiving entrance exams?
So we don't have entrance exams. That's not typically something we do. Some of our schools require the GRE, but many don't. Some of our schools may require interviews, but most don't. So there's no formal entrance exam like you may see in other programs. We do have on our website, or actually on our Facebook page, a conversation that we did with some of our admissions directors about how COVID is changing the admissions process. That'll probably go way more in depth about what's changed. I think we can talk about the GREs if you want, but that's probably the closest we would have to something like an entrance exam.
Oh, okay. And also, this is the last question unless someone else, another student has a question. If not, this will be the last question. What tips do you have to make my LinkedIn profile stand out?
I think, again, that use of detail, again, that use of results. So not just telling me what you did, but what was the impact of what you did, making it short, making it clear, making it skimmable. Sometimes you see LinkedIn profiles and it's the great American novel and you can't find anything that you need. Now LinkedIn has this banner that you can add to your photograph that says open to work, which is a nice way to signal to folks. You can turn on the button that says you're open to being contacted by recruiters or different organizations. You're gonna get a lot of weird stuff, at least I do. But you may also turn up in somebody's search as they're looking for someone, particularly an early career. Use the follow button as much or more than the trying to connect button. I get a lot of requests to connect from random people who just find me, and I'm not going to connect with you. That gives you access to my personal information. It gives you access to my personal email, my birth date, like no, but you can follow me all the time and see the jobs that I post or see the opportunities that I post. So don't be afraid to use that instead of trying to connect. And follow organizations that you're interested in. They regularly post opportunities there, but it also gives you that market intel that we talked about, how they talk about themselves, what kinds of stories they hold up, what sorts of things they're celebrating or talking about or putting out publicly into the world. So if there's real companies that interest you, follow them on LinkedIn, use it as a search tool, use it to find others in your space or an alum or a person who's working at that organization that you want to work at or someone you want to be like. And then it is acceptable to send them a message or even sort of backdoor it and get their email address through Google and just say, I'm a student or I'm a recent grad. I see that you've done this and this. I kind of like to be like you, or I'd like to learn if I'd like to be like you. Would you talk to me? Especially in sort of the DC corridor, people are not humble and they're not shy and they're very willing to sort of pontificate about themselves. So you'll find a warm audience there. And LinkedIn can really help you figure out who to zero in on that you want to talk to. It'll also, again, help you maybe find alum from Bowie State or other people that are connected to people you know. If your staff or your faculty are open to it, see if they would be willing to connect with you, and then you can see who's in their network. So use it as a tool, but again, make sure your profile, because that's where people are going to go to decide whether they want to actually connect with you and talk to you or not, really showcases in a clear, concise way the things that you've done and the accomplishments that you've had. And to get back to the first question about retail, again, those are things you can list. Manage store, handled product, bring products worth a lot of money, handled cash, handled people, managed Walmart warehouse at Christmas time. I mean, that reveals to me that you can handle stress and you can handle pressure and you can deal with lots of details all at the same time. So use those things, even if it feels like it's not directly relevant to an interest in national security or directly relevant to an international affairs career. Those are the intangible traits that I'm looking for in a candidate, and it shows me that you can do it without you sort of writing the bland sentence, I can handle stress. Well, anyone can write it, but if you've handled a warehouse at Christmas or a retail floor at Christmas time, you can show me that you've done it. And that's a really good way to prove it without just kind of generic, bland statements.
Well, thank you, Carmen. So at this time, we have about 5 minutes left. So if anyone else has any questions, please welcome to unmute yourself and ask the question, or you can enter your question at the chat box. So I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to see if anyone else has any questions that they want to ask before you go, and just enter those in the chat box. So we'll give a few moments. Okay, we'll just give another minute here. Okay, Carmen, so it looks like no one else has any questions for you. I would just like to thank you on behalf of all of our students, on behalf of the Career Development Center, for being here with us today. This presentation was awesome. Awesome. You rocked it. So just thank you for coming today and presenting for us. You are very appreciated.
Well, thank you all for having me, and I'm happy to follow up with any of you all and use this fine team. They know what they're talking about, and they are here to help you, and students sometimes miss that. So thank you all for being here and for being interested, and I look forward to connecting down the line.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.